Welcome, everybody. I am continually impressed with the size of the crowd in this weekly Zoom gathering, and especially as we get deeper into Yevamot, which don't know about for you, but for me, there's I'm finding this Masachet to be challenging in many ways, and there are pages and chapters that have increased. I don't know, headaches for me, and a good cup of tea always helps with that. This week we're in sort of a pattern where we're seeing a series of Mishnayot that are dealing with different combinations and permutations of family situations, and then an analysis of how that affects the obligation upon the various family members. Most specifically, surviving brothers of deceased men who die without children, and spouses of the husband who is deceased, and what their obligations are. And if you're following the Mishnayot, you know we have Mishnayot that say two brothers marry two sisters, or three brothers marry three sisters, or even four brothers marry four sisters. When I was a kid, I remember, I think I learned about it through a Monty Python skit about, right, there was a TV show or a movie or playwright, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. I know it through the Monty Python skit that made fun of it, not the original. But it feels to me like this section of Yevamot, I like to call like it's the Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and then disaster strikes, and what do we do? There's a way in which some ways we've settled into a routine with these Mishnayot, because we see a new case, we just have to draw our own little sketch of the family tree, figure out who met their demise and who is left, and what combinations of levirate marriage are possible and which are not, and which are allowed and which are not. And we see shorter conversations about each of the cases of the Mishnah, as opposed to earlier in the Masachet, where we saw some really long, windy, complex conversations. And so we learn a new case, we see what the rabbis have to say about it, we pick up some of those nuances, but it leads to, for me anyways, to ask a question that showed up in the middle of this week, that I'm going to just pull up my slides right now to share the screen. I'm sharing the screen, and have this question that shows up on Yevamot, page 30a. Why do I need this Mishnah as well? And this question, which shows up in the middle of this week, I think for me in some ways is the overarching question of this chapter, or this section of Yevamot. Why do we need all of these cases? They all seem so similar. While they are each their own unique case, and there are some nuances for each, like sometimes I just say, oh, isn't this the same as the Mishnah just before? It's not so different as what we saw. And while we'll see the specific context where the Gemara asked this question in particular, I'm asking this question about this chapter as a whole. And what that led me to do is to go back and think a little bit about the nature of the Mishnah itself and our understandings about it, to answer the question more broadly, like how do we think about this question? Why do I need this Mishnah as well, in a moment where the Mishnah seems potentially repetitive, or to have a new case that doesn't add so much to the old case? And to illustrate some of these points, we're gonna jump to a different Masachet, but then we're gonna come back. To illustrate our approach to studying Mishnah about this issue, why do I need this Mishnah? I'm going to the first Mishnah of Mishnah Brachot from chapter 5. And if you've been with us on the Daf Yomi journey, right, a couple of years ago, we encountered this. And this is a really good one to illustrate the point I want to make, and then we'll jump to Yevamot to see how it plays out there. So this Mishnah, the theme of it starts with, one may only stand up to pray from an approach of gravity, right? The Mishnah Brachot deals in part with prayer. And this specific Mishnah, the rabbis teach us that when you're going to get up to pray, and for them that means the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah, right, the 18 Benedictions, a silent prayer, we have different names for it. You have to do it from a serious place, right? You shouldn't be lighthearted. You should be serious about it. And then at the end of this Mishnah, they bring two cases that sort of, in some ways, illustrate how serious you should be while you are saying this prayer. And first they say, even if one is greeted by the king, one should not respond. And then they say, even if a snake is wrapped up on one's heel, a person should not interrupt their prayer. So two things, two cases are brought, two examples are brought about you're supposed to have such a serious approach to pray that if you're davening like by the roadside and the king comes by and says and greets you, you shouldn't respond. You should be focused on your prayer itself. Right? The Gemara later says, right, if you're standing before the King of Kings who lives in heaven, you're not going to interrupt that conversation to respond to a king of flesh and blood. I think we're not, unless I know we're an international group, so there might be people from countries on the call who still have monarchies. This might be the same. We have this reverence for presidents in our country, or maybe just any famous figures. Or someone says hi to you, you might be inclined to stop praying and say back, but the Mishnah says not to. And then it says, right, if a snake is wrapped around your heel, don't interrupt. And a question that comes about these two cases is like, why do I need this Mishnah that has both these cases? Doesn't one suffice? So I put the question to you. What can we? I put the question to you, and I'm sorry, I'm opening up my chat function. What do you think? Why do we need these two cases? Why doesn't just one suffice? If you have a thought about that, put it in the chat. All right, I'm pausing a little bit. Oh, here comes the responses are starting to come in. So Rob says one's about societal interaction and one is about personal danger. Opposite. One is a pleasant thing, right? You might want to meet the king, but you don't want to meet the fence. Nice. So we're starting to see, if you're following in the chat too, we're starting to see some differences between the two. For the rabbis, right, the king posed danger in a similar way to the snake, meaning it's possible that if you anger the king by not responding, what could the king say? Off with your head. The same way, if you don't deal with the snake that's wrapped around your ankle, it could bite you and it could be life-threatening. So the rabbis might read these as similar in the danger factor, that both of these cases involve danger, because the king, like the snake, like the king, or the king, like the snake, could both cause you harm. But you're starting to get the point by all of your responses that I see here. There's some nice insights about, right? We can find differences between the two. And what the Gemara actually says about this, right? From one case, we learn one thing that we don't learn from the other. And what they land on is potentially that, right, the king is a human actor, a rational actor. So that there are some stories in this part of the Gemara where we see people encounter kings or other non-Jewish people who wait around because they weren't responded to and said, like, hey, how come you didn't say hi back while you were praying? You put yourself at risk. How come? So the king actually voices, some of the threat there. But the king is a rational actor and may, in and of himself, be able to figure out, oh, you're praying, and so, I'm not interrupting. It might be okay. And the snake, being a wild animal, is an irrational actor, right? And you could say if it only taught about king, that when it's if the text only taught about king and not snake, it might say when you have a rational actor, it's okay not to respond. But when it's an irrational actor like a snake, it's okay to run away. And actually, later the Gemara differentiates between snakes and scorpions and other animals. But anyways, the point is here that we learn one case. We learn one thing from one case, and we learn something different from the next case, and that's why we need both. And so, what's the connection? Well, this goes back to the question of the day: is why do I need this Mishnah? And the connection here is not about content. The connection here is more about form of the Mishnah. And I'm going to bring up my next slide. Hang on, I just have to close the chat. Oh. I brought up too many slides, sorry. So the Mishnah from Yevamot we're going to look at is a little more dense. Sorry for the crowded slide here. But we have here two Mishnayot that come in, one right after the other in the Mishnah, and the Gemara deals with them also consecutively. And if you take a minute to read the two, you see the cases, and the Mishnayot are very, 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 very similar and raises this same question, right? Why do I need both cases? Right here, and even the introductory paragraph, very close. Mishnah A says, in the case of three brothers, two of whom were married to two sisters, and one who was married to an unrelated woman, the second Mishnah is exactly the same scenario, right? Three brothers, two of whom were married to two sisters, and a third who was married to someone unrelated. Now in Mishnah A, what happens? The husband of one of the sisters dies first, and then the brother who was married to the unrelated woman performs a levirate marriage and marries his deceased brother's wife, and he later dies himself, childless. So the two widows fall to the third brother who's married to the second sister. And in Mishnah B, it's the husband of the unrelated woman who dies childless, and then one of the husbands of one of the sisters performs levirate marriage, but then that husband dies himself. And once again, the third brother who's married to one of the sisters falls before two women, one who is the sister of his wife and one who is unrelated, for levirate marriage. And in both situations, one woman is dismissed, right, not eligible, right, not able to fall before him for levirate marriage because she is the sister of the surviving husband's wife. And the second woman, who as a rival wife, was also dismissed from the obligation, which we learned in the opening Mishnah. So very similar cases. The small difference between the two here is which of the brothers dies first, based on, and what differentiates the cases is who that person is married to. But in both cases, the third and only surviving brother ends up married. It begins married to a sister and ends up with two women falling to him for levirate marriage simultaneously, one who is his wife's sister and one who is unrelated, but neither, because of the rules that we've learned at the beginning of the Masechet, are responsible for the mission of levirate, for the mitzvah of levirate marriage, because of the close relation of the spouse of the third husband and the women who fell before him. And to this Mishnah, to these Mishnayot, the question that I led with at the beginning comes up in the Gemara. Why do I need both of these Mishnahs? Not only, right, are they, a little bit similar, they're a lot of bit similar. And unlike, the case that we saw from Mishnah Bachot, the example I brought, where you guys came up with a whole series of things that could be different about the case of the king from the case of the snake, this doesn't seem to be so different. And in fact, that's what the Gemara says about it. The Gemara about this Mishnah leads with, why do I need this Mishnah as well? Which is the question that I started with, and why the Gemara explains its question. This principle is identical to the principle behind the ruling in the previous Mishnah, meaning both the ruling and the principle behind it is the same. We don't really need both of the Mishnayot because they teach us exactly the same thing. And that spells out a little bit what this is in a long Gemara sentence, which I've split into two parts. So hopefully it's making it a little clearer, because it's a run-on sentence in many ways. The Gemara is good at that, right? The Gemara explains now, right? Just as meaning in the first Mishnah, Mishnah A, when his wife's sister becomes rival wife of the unrelated woman who's already his brother's wife, you can say that the unrelated woman is forbidden despite the fact that the forbidden relative joined later. Meaning, in the case of Mishnah A, it doesn't matter the order of who fell before whom and when, because there's a sister of the current wife and an unrelated woman, they both become exempt. Here too, where the unrelated woman became the rival wife of his wife's sister, isn't it, the same? Isn't it just as clear or even more clear that she's exempt of the rival wife? In other words, the difference between these two cases is which husband died and which of the women, the sister or the rival wife, fell first for him to levirate marriage in these different relationships. And but either way, the order doesn't affect the end, and it's feasible that we don't need the second Mishnah at all. Now, going back to the example from Brachot, right, the classic way to think about multiple similar cases is the way that we analyze that Brachot text. When the Mishnah has two things that are similar, even if we're asking this question, why do I need this Mishnah as well? The typical Talmudic response to that is, I'm going to drill down until I find the difference between the two. And even when they're as similar as these two things, right, we've seen over the past couple of years many examples of the Gemara really drilling down and working hard to figure out what's the different thing that I can tease out of case B that I couldn't tease out of case A, or vice versa, to justify the Mishnah having both, because each teaches us something unique. And what's interesting in this situation, because of the similarity perhaps, the Gemara does not go to that fallback response and takes a very different approach to answering this question, which is atypical and sort of goes against the notion that, right, there's no extra teaching in the Mishnah. Each Mishnah teaches its own thing. And here's what it teaches. I'm going to take you through these steps here. I'm going to say from the outset there's some confusion because there's the first Mishnah and the second Mishnah as in terms of the order they appear in the Mishnah, and also the order in which, like, they came before they came before the Tana, the sage who put this chapter together, and you just have to sort out like which Mishnah we're talking about at which time. But I'll try to take you through that as we go. So why do we need the second Mishnah? Well, it's not content driven; it's actually process driven. The Gemara tells us the Tana, the sage who put together this chapter, actually taught the second Mishnah first. So Mishnah B, while it comes second in the Mishnah, is actually the original Mishnah entered into the chapter. And with regard to the case in the first Mishnah, so Mishnah A, the Tana initially saw it fit to render the woman permitted, and he permitted her to the brother. So initially, says the Gemara, the second Mishnah was taught first, and with regard to the case in the first Mishnah, the law was different. The order in which the husbands died made a difference about who was permitted to levirate marriage and who was not. So the first case, he thought the woman should be permitted. But subsequently, the Tana retracted this view and saw it fit to render the woman forbidden. He changed his mind. He came to see that the rule should be the same in both cases, and the women in the second case should be forbidden to the husband, both the sister and the one who was not related. And then what happened? Since this second case that the Tana dealt with, which we saw as Mishnah A, was new, was novel, it was a new thing that he discovered. It became beloved to him, and he taught it first. Right? Somehow, the change in mind and the new ruling that he saw, right? The light bulb went off and he said, I'm going to change my ruling, endeared him to this text, and he put it first in this chapter of Mishnah. And why couldn't it just replace the previous one? Well, here's the rub at the end. The Gemara says, a Mishnah does not move from its place. And what does that mean? Once a Mishnah is fixed into the text of the Mishnah, it stays there. So here we see the Gemara telling some story about the way in which the Mishnah, its understanding of how the Mishnah came together. Right? It sees an individual sage shaping a chapter and having some freedom to decide the order of Mishnayot. It shows that, right, the structure of the Mishnah, the order of the Mishnayot was in flux at a certain time. And here we have a case where originally there was only one Mishnah, and then a new case arose that there was some debate about what the law should be. And when the Tana who shaped the Mishnah determined that the ruling was changing, he came to feel that this was really important Mishnah, and he put it prior. But putting it prior didn't allow him to take out the other Mishnah, because once the other Mishnah was there, it's there to stay. Now you might say, right, in the principles of editing, right, well, no, you put something new in, you could take something new out. Why would you need to keep the old one if it creates this repetition? And what both the commentators and the academic scholars lean to in terms of answering that question has to do with our understanding of the nature of the Mishnah in its early stages. We know ultimately the Mishnah became a written document, but in its early stages, we're pretty sure the Mishnah was an oral document and it was memorized. So one principle is something that's memorized should be as short as possible to help the people whose job it is to memorize it keep it, in their heads. And that's why, like we learned from Brachot, each example in the Mishnah is supposed to teach us its own thing. But there's another principle too. Once the person who memorizes a long text like the Mishnah has it in their head, we don't want to mess with the order because it could cause them to be forgetful or make their memory imperfect. So once a Mishnah is fixed in the order, even if you have a reason to add a second similar Mishnah that makes the original one no longer necessary, you still have to keep the original one there so that the people who memorize the Mishnah could keep it in their heads. So here in the middle of Yevamot, in a chapter where we have a lot of similar Mishnayot, the Gemara finally stumbles on two that seem to teach us exactly the same thing. And what comes out of that? Yes, by the Mishnah's rules of being brief and using each case to teach something unique, we shouldn't have both these Mishnayot. But because of how the Mishnah was preserved and the process by which it came together, here we see a repetitive scenario where we needed both Mishnayot to preserve the bigger tradition as a whole. So that's what I bring to you today. I closed the shared screen. I'm going to bring back up the chat, and we have a few minutes or so to respond to some of your questions. So, Ben, if you could do me the kindness of helping flag some of the questions that, if you notice some, that would be helpful to me.
Yeah, well, there's a few comments / questions about what might be behind some of the reason for unchanging the Mishnah. Laura observes that it might have been out of respect for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Saul observes that there's an openness to process, that Atana changed his position, but it still found its way into the text. Yoram says that it's like accounting. Once a record is made, it should be removed for auditing. And on a slightly different note, I flagged a comment from Mary Jane who says, I think referring to why all of these different cases might be recorded. Death is always a traumatic event, and in these Mishnayot, different men die. Perhaps it is important for the wives and relatives of the community of the deceased to see their exact case in print in the Talmud.
Ooh, nice. I love. Well, all of those are very insightful. I want to just respond to the last one. One of the things, it's interesting that you see that, right? That naming all these cases helps the families see their scenario if they're in one of these unique cases in the text. I'm always struck in Yevamot by the lack of pastoral awareness, meaning we're so fixated on, who has to do what about you. I'm just waiting for one rabbi to say, before we figure out who has to be the lever, the Yavam and the Yavama, what levirate relationship is going to emerge, let's just take a minute to deal with the grief. Let's just take a minute to check in and see what our needs are. And that was an interesting way to see that there. I do want to respond to the person who talked about, right, out of deference to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is the sage whose tradition records as, right, the one responsible for the Mishnah. And up until about, the last 200 years or so, the rabbinic narrative and the narrative about that was, right, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi wrote or perhaps edited the Mishnah, meaning he was the figure who wrote the final text, or perhaps he was the person who took all the prior versions and prior texts and set and edited it, like sort of the lone author or the lone editor approach. Over time, and in the modern era, more and more the academics have seen that it might have been during he might have been involved in the project. It's more likely that it was during his administration or during his era that the Mishnah came to be finalized, and that while he might have been an editor or someone who helped shape the text, that this is a work that had many, many, many hands that played a part in it, and no one person is responsible for the text as a whole. And we're more inclined, based on the academic study of the Talmud of the last couple hundred years, to say, right, it was during Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's time as the leader of the rabbinic world that the Mishnah came together, and he had some influence over that project, but many people did some of that, and potentially this Mishnah shows, right, an individual Tana who's not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi making decisions about what's in or what's out. And in the rabbinic timeline, like this might have happened before Yehuda Nasi gave it its final approval, but the interrelation between the different editors and like the editor-in-chief is hard for us to know, because just of the 2,000 years that between us and the Mishnah coming into its final form. Anyways, but that is some of we see from time to time seems about how was the Mishnah edited and who edited the Mishnah, and this Mishnah is a little glimpse for some of this as well. All right, did you notice anything else we should address, Ben?
There is a comment here that takes us a little bit off this track, but Janine is bringing something down from Daf 31 where there's a mention of not taking the stringent position if there's in a case of uncertainty. And she asks, which is more stringent, requiring a levered marriage or chalitza, or making the women exempt and therefore allowing marriage to others? Which one of those is a more stringent position?
I love that question, Janine, because the rabbinic response is right. What's stringent for me could be lenient for you, and vice versa. There is some subjectivity about that, and we know in the not just in Yevamot and other places, like sometimes the rabbis disagree about which is the stringent position and which is not. Right? You could argue that the stringent position is one that requires a widow and her brother-in-law to have a levirate marriage, right? And being stringent about requiring that obligation is the stringent position, and chalitza is the more lenient position because it lets them out of this obligation that may or may not be comfortable for them, right? There's already a notion embedded in Yevamot that ordinarily, except in the case of a levirate marriage, a woman and her brother-in-law, right, or a man and his sister-in-law are forbidden to each other, and this is an exception because of the need to have a child in the name of the deceased brother, where the two people involved are allowed to marry, and so that you can imagine the family scenarios where that union has its awkward and uncomfortable, and being stringent to hold to the requirement for levirate marriage and not take the chalitza as the way out is one way to look at the situation. And I think most of the time, that's the way the rabbis in the text look at it. I could say that in that sugya that you're referring to, that's page 31 and following, there are lots of ins and outs to it, and like any good, long, complex Talmud sugya, there's not always one clear response to it. And some of the nuances of that sugya get into exactly what's behind your question. But I think it's really insightful, and I would say, based on my understanding of Yevamot, mostly going to levirate marriage and holding to that obligation is the stringent option.
Thank you, Elliot. And my apologies. We are now past time, so my apologies to all those comments and questions that we didn't get to, but they were wonderful, and thank you for sharing them with us. And thank you to all of us for joining us this morning. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for taking us through the last week, and we will see you next week. Everybody, take good care.
All right, take care, everybody. Shabbat shalom, and we'll see you. I'll see you after Pesach.
Okay.
How is this in Pesach? And thank you, Ben.